Okay, welcome back. So in this section, we're going to take a look at some reverbs and delays to try to give us this mix a little bit of size without sounding too washy. So again, my thinking is as I'm moving through this, again, keeping in the theme of trying to emulate this analog studio kind of a feel, I'm kind of looking for something that sounds like a live room that's not going to be massively huge sounding or washed out in a bunch of reverb, et cetera, et cetera. I just want to give this track a little bit more size. It's kind of a modern-ish kind of a rock track. Right now it sounds kind of dry, kind of punchy, kind of thick, and I just want to give it a little bit more life with being subtle, okay? So what we're going to do is we're going to, what I've done over here, down here in the end, you can see I created a drum room track, and I've also created a guitar room track. Okay, so on those tracks, and we'll solo up our drums first here, we're going to use the same plugin that I used in the beginning of the series, in the plugin comparison section of the series. We're going to use the Slate Digital Verb Suites Classics because it's affordable. It's something most of you will have access to this, as opposed to maybe the Universal Audio Ocean Way, which is a little bit more expensive. It's a little bit more, not everybody has it. I love this reverb because this has a ton of great presets in them, where you can have just about everything you need in one plugin. So to show you that example, I've gone ahead and I've created a drum room of track here, and we're using this plugin. I'm picking a preset called Realistic Full Drum Room 2. So you just click on here and they have them categorized by instruments, and this is the one I picked. And then under the load device button, when you open this up, we're using the 480, the FG 480 hardware, and under the rooms tab, we're using the CLA Chrysalart Algae's Audio Legends drum room. Okay. And that's kind of that's the preset that I'm using. I'm keeping it on 100% wet, and I'm using the preset settings, which the gain is, the decay is right around 12 o'clock. We have everything from attack, pre-delay, chorusing, which is off, the width, which is around 1 o'clock, and then we have an EQ section down here, which is pretty much at 12 noon, with the exception of the highs, which is rolled off a little bit. Okay, and I demonstrated the functions of these in the section much earlier in this series. Okay, then what I've done is I've sent all of my drums via the send over to the drum room track. I'm doing everything pre-fader. And I'm getting a nice healthy signal. Most of it is set to 0 dB on the send level, with the exception of the kick drum is at like a -4, because I don't want the kick to have as much effect on it as the rest of the drums. I like to dry it up a little bit more on the kick. That's just my personal preference. And I'm also not sending the room track to that because it's already has that space built in. Okay, makes sense? So that's what I'm doing on the drum room. So I've soloed up the drums here. So listen to what we have. Okay, so everything's being sent over here to the drum room, and then everything is done here. Everything is being done in the solo safe mode, and we got the Verb Suite Classics here. And if we play this back, again, you can see how much signal we have here. Very, very little. So what I do is I'm going to start with it all the way down and just kind of turn it up to taste. There's the reverb sound. Obviously, that's too much. So I dial it up, and I'm listening for the kick and the snare just to get a little bit of size, and then I back it down a little. Okay, so you can hear when I unmute the drum room track and I bypass this reverb plugin, you can hear how the drums get very dry and very narrow, right? This is going to give it a little more space, a little bit more width. Now, again, we'll adjust the final level of this in the context with the mix. We should always do that, right? But just for demonstration purposes, I want you to hear it. That's about the amount of reverb I'm going to use, give or take a little bit. And as you can see, it's not very much. I don't want this thing to sound like it has a plugin on it. I want it to sound natural. And that's what I love about this plugin, that it sounds natural. And as I said earlier on in the series, when we went through the comparison between some of these plugins, I told you that where you really get your money's worth and where it really makes a difference when you talk about spending money on third-party plugins as compared to your stock plugins, the biggest bang for the buck or the most noticeable differences in the reverbs and delays. I find that with the reverbs and delays, no matter what DAW I've used, the reverbs always sound very hollow. They don't sound very natural to me. Yes, you can tweak them in, you can get them to sound passable, but they don't have that richness to it. Reverbs and delays. Like with something like the Verb Suite's Classics or any of the Universal Audio or Waves plugins. Okay, so I'm a big proponent of getting yourself a really good reverb and a really good delay. And again, I'm going to show you a delay in a few minutes because that's really going to help. You don't want a hollow kind of a, just an uninspiring sound. You want it to sound natural. You don't want to sound like we have a plugin. Okay, so this is our drum sound. Okay. Now, I've also done the same thing with all the guitars, the bass, and the piano. The vocals we're going to treat separately. Maybe not in this video, in the next video, but we're going to do that separately. But for the instruments, we have bass, guitar, the 3 electric guitars, and the piano, all going to a guitar room reverb. Okay. So I created another track down here, guitar verb. I'm using the same plugin, and I'm using the same exact preset. And the only thing I've adjusted is the decay. And you may say, well, why are you doing that? The reason why I'm doing that is because, again, I want this to sound like it was all recorded in the same live room together. And the only reason why I have a separate track with the same exact plugin with the same preset is I wanted to adjust the decay time only on the guitars and on the piano. I didn't want the decay to be as long as the drums because it didn't sound right to me. So I have a little bit more control that way. But by using the same preset, it gives the whole band the sound of cohesiveness. Okay, one of the mistakes, or I wouldn't say mistakes, but one of the things that kind of drifts away from this kind of style of mixing, I'll see people put a separate reverb for their drums, a separate reverb for their guitars, a separate reverb for their pianos and their strings. There'll be different plugins, different presets. One's a digital delay, one's an analog delay, one has all kinds of weird modulation in it. And although you can get some real interesting, cool sounds, but again, that's not, if you want that more analog kind of old school vibe, that's not what we're doing. They usually would put everything through the same reverb or two. And in this case, don't think of this as a reverb. I keep calling it a reverb because it's a reverb plugin, but what we're really doing is we're creating a room sound, and we're putting all the instruments in a room to give it a natural feel. So again, just like the same thinking with the channel strip, why do we put the same channel strip across all the plugins? Because it gives the record a sound of cohesiveness, and that's the same idea here. Okay, I hope that makes sense to you. So I did the same thing with the guitars and the piano, and I just put it on a separate track, and all I did was adjusted the decay. Okay, so we're going to play that back now. Okay, so on the guitars and the piano, it's a little more subtle. Listen to when I'm playing back this section of music purposely, so when the guitar hits that chord and kind of stops, listen for the sustain, listen for the decay. Okay, so I'm muting these and bypassing these both together at the same time for a reason, so you can hear the overall effect. So without the reverb, without the room, the mix kind of collapses in on itself. It goes from sounding like it's out here and it kind of pulls in, right? Because the room is giving it more space. That's the whole point of this. So we're going from here, it sounds wide, it sounds a little full, a little bit lively, and I get rid of the rooms, and all of a sudden the mix kind of collapses in a little bit. It's not horrible, but again, subtlety. You can hear the room kind of come away, and it gets a little dry, and it doesn't have as much life. Okay, now again, just like with everything else, this is all dialed into taste. And you want to do this in the context of the mix. We'll end up doing this in the end with the vocals playing as well, but I want you to hear the demonstration here. And it's just a matter of how much you want. You can play around with this as much as you want. So right now, we have the reverbs enabled. Watch as I just hit the mute buttons, and I'll toggle it on and off, and you'll hear how the mix kind of shifts from narrow to a little more wide. So we'll start with them on. Here we go. Okay, so hopefully you can hear the difference here. Again, it's subtle, and it's supposed to be subtle, okay? So that gives it a little more space, a little bit more room. So all of our drums are going to our drum room. All our guitars, bass, and piano are going to the guitar room, okay? Now for the lead vocals. Now the lead vocals and the background vocals, again, I treat a little bit differently because I want these things to sound a little bit bigger than just a room. Now we have our instruments in a room. Now let's talk about our reverbs and delays on our vocal track. So let's start with our background vocals because we kind of ganged them all up together. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create for my vocals. I typically like, and again, not every track's a little different, but here's kind of my standard operating procedure. I have a delay, and then I go into 3 reverbs, from the delay to a room reverb to a plate reverb to a hall reverb. In very small increments, I stack them. So the overall effect is the vocals will tend to have a bigger, larger space or a larger sound to them, but they don't sound washy. Okay, that's super important. Unless you got a track that's like a love ballad or acoustic guitar vocal solo or a piano guitar solo vocal where you want to have that big ambient sound, then that's a different story. Then you want to dial in more juice, right? But for something like this, it's dry, it's punchy, it's rock music. I just want it to get a little bit bigger in space. I want the stuff to be really subtle. So what we're going to do is we're going to send our lead vocal track. Let's get to a verse, and let's start it here. Go to the first verse.
As far as I can remember, you never made a single effort.
Okay, and we're going to want to go over to our delay unit. Again, pre-fader it.
For her to make me not feel segregated.
Okay, it's kind of a choppy delay, kind of an eighth note delay with not a lot of feedback. We want it to be subtle because the reverbs are going to enhance that, okay? So that's our delay sound. Now from there, I'm going to go ahead, let me expand this a little bit. We're now going to go over to our plate reverb. And now for plate, a room reverb. So our room, we're going to go ahead and we're going to use the Verb Suites Classic again, just because why not? Again, it's a wonderful plugin. And we're going to look for a small room. Okay, so I'm just going to come over here, going to go over to vocals. We're going to pick a small vocal room is what we're going to do. Let's see what we got here. We're going to go natural vocal room. Close enough. We're going to start with the decay down a little bit. I want this to be kind of a short reverb. Okay, so we're going to go over to our lead vocal track, and we're going to now send it over to our vocal small room. Again, once again, pre-fader, 0 dB on the send level.
Yeah, as far as I can remember, you never made a single effort to make me not feel segregated. As far as I can remember, you never made a single effort to make me not feel segregated.
Okay, so now you can start to hear that small room is starting to enhance the delay a little bit more. That's why we're using very conservative levels of delay, because we don't want this thing to get too big and washy. Okay, so now I kind of set that relationship. Now we're going to go to our plate reverb. I'm going to use the same plugin. We're going to choose a different preset. Okay, so now we're going to come over here and we're going to go over to a plate. I'm going to use the CLA, what the CLA has a good plate in here, I think, doesn't it? Yeah, CLA plate has a good preset. And we're going to use the plate, and we're going to do the same exact thing. I'm going to turn down the level so you don't get blasted out here, and I'm going to send it now over to a plate. And we're going to go pre-fader once again, and we're going to go 0 dB, and we're going to dial it into taste.
As far as I can remember, you never made a single effort.
Okay, you can start to hear it get a little bit bigger, a little bit more full. It's subtle. That's the key to this, subtlety, okay?
Single effort to make me not feel segregated.
Okay, so now last but certainly not least, we're going to go over to our hall, and we're going to use the same plugin, just why not? And we're going to go to our hall, and we're going to create a vocal hall reverb, and we're going to tweak it to taste. Let's go pop vocal hall, because why not, right? And we're going to go ahead and we're going to turn down the decay a little bit here. We're going to turn down the high end on the EQ as well. And again, we're going to dial it into taste. We're going to go very subtle on this. And we're going to now go to a hall reverb. Pre-fader, 0 dB. Here we go.
As far as I can remember, you never made a single effort.
So you hear how that reverb now is starting to get a little bit bigger. The reverb, the delay is a little bit more pronounced. Okay, because we're like just sprinkling a little salt in. Now, once I have the relationship between these 4 tracks, I can highlight them and move them all together, and it'll keep the relationship between them intact. And what I do, to be honest, is I turn it up until I can hear it a little too obvious, and I just back it off a little, and you just play with it till you find out where you want it.
To make me not feel segregated. As far as I can remember, you never made a single effort to make me not feel segregated. As far as I can remember, you never made a single effort to make me not feel segregated. As far as I can remember, you never made a single effort to make me not feel segregated.
Okay, hear the difference there and how much, again, more space we give the vocal, where we take away that delay and 3 reverbs and everything gets very narrow again. Okay, so now let's do the same thing with our background vocals. We'll use a lot of the same plugins here. So on our background vocals, what I'm going to do, again, to keep this easy. Now, on our chorus here, on our lead vocal too, we're just gonna copy everything over, because our chorus track is we want the same kind of reverb and delays as we have on our verse track. The only difference is you may decide, again, we won't do that in this video because this series is already running real long. You can automate your chorus, so maybe you have a little bit more effects on your chorus than you do on your verse. You can do things like that because they're separated, which is one reason to maybe separate your vocal verses and your vocal choruses and pre-choruses on separate tracks, because you can process them different. But for this, we're just going to keep it really simple. Okay, so now we have our chorus over there as well. Now also keep in mind that when we kick in our chorus, we have all these background vocals that are going on too. And that's going to help give more size to this because we have so many more supporting vocal tracks behind the chorus. Okay, but anyhow, for our chorus track, and again, the background vocals are not, they're muted right now.
The fact of me being different, just another symptom. You can accept how I'm not what you expected. You can stand, I smoke and drink, and that I'm not what you may think. I don't know how this will be. As far as I can remember, you never made a single effort to make me not feel segregated. The fact of me being different is to you just another symptom. You can accept how I'm.
Hear how much more space and how much more live that sounds when I take all the reverbs and delays away in the rooms from the instruments and the vocals. Listen to the difference there. I mean, that should have been a pretty obvious difference. I'll go ahead and loop this a little bit further so we can hear all the vocal tracks. but hopefully you heard that. If you didn't, we're going to do it again. So I'm going to start with the reverbs and delays in, and I'm just going to go ahead. I'm just going to mute them all halfway through and turn them back on, and listen to how when you take them away, how much smaller everything sounds. Once you get used to hearing it with it on and you take it away, it instantly makes a big impact, but it doesn't sound washy. It sounds natural. Now, again, I did this in 5 minutes. You could sit there with your mixing. You could tweak this into perfection, but I'm just showing you the concept.
That's how I'm not what you expected. You can't stand, I smoke and drink, and then I'm not what you may think. I don't know how this will be. What you get is what you'll see. No dress blowing in the wind. That's your dream, but that's not me.
Okay, so hopefully you can hear the difference there. It is quite obvious, somewhat subtle, but it's definitely obvious. Now for our background vocals. What I tend to do on background vocals in a situation like this is I'm not going to send them to the delay and the small room and the plate. I'm just going to send them to the hall. And the reason for that is because in this particular track, we have a lot of background vocals going on. We already have that chorusy kind of large effect. And again, I don't want to wash it too much in effect. So we're just going to go to the hall. Now, again, you could play with this on your mix, and you can change this around. This is just kind of a starting point for me. I'll always listen, and as I'm finishing up a mix, I'll change things as we go. But again, for demonstration purposes, this is what we get. So now if we have all of our instruments in here, nothing should be muted anymore. Let's unmute everything, and let's listen to the entire mix now with that reverb and with those halls and on those background vocals, and let's see what they sound like. If we find like it's too much hall reverb, we can always turn down the send level, right? We can always do that.
What you get is what you'll see. I won't change just to suit you. No dress.
I want to see if I can hear these in isolation here. These background vocal ones. I just want to hear these in isolation for a second.
I always thought I'd never lose you.
Okay, those are completely dry. Why are those completely dry? Let's see. Well, that's why I didn't like the way they sounded, because they were completely dry. We're going to the lead vocal bus. These are going, oh, I see why, because we got these bussed out to different buses. Okay, so what we're going to do, we're going to make this real easy. We're just going to go ahead and on the hall, we're going to create a separate track here. So we're going to create a bus channel. I use bus channels. Or no, excuse me. Oh, that's my mistake. Sorry about that. Remove. We're going to create next to this hall verb, we're going to create another effects channel. And we're going to call this one background hall. Background vocal hall. Okay, so make sure we get the routing right. And I'm going to route this over to the background vocals. Let's see, over to here. Okay, now if I put that should be a solo safe. And now if I just copy the same plugin over to the background vocal halls, and we can give it a little bit more decay if we chose to. And we're going to call this background vocal halls. Okay, we're going to change all of these. Well, first I'm just going to highlight all this. Let's see, hold on here. Okay. All right, so now we're in the background vocal halls. There we go. Okay, turn this down.
I won't change just to suit you.
Okay, now we have some hall reverb on those background vocals. Okay, so now let's go ahead and let's again unmute everything and let's play back the whole track. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to again highlight all the effects we've put on thus far for delays and reverbs and take them away so you can hear the difference. Here we go.
As I can remember, you never made a single effort to make me not feel segregated. of me being different. Wasting you just another symptom. You can accept how I'm not what you expected. You can stand, I smoke and drink, and that I'm not what you may think. I don't know how this will be. I always thought I'd never lose you. What you get is what you'll see. I won't change just to suit you. No dress blowing in the wind. You'll see me running through the hayfields. That's your dream, but that's not me. I won't change just to suit you. Sorry, I don't wear stilettos.
Okay, so there's kind of our reverb and kind of my reverb delay tip or trick or concept that you want to call it. Again, just in summary, we're using the two instrument tracks here, our drum room and our guitar room, which is really our guitar room reverb is kind of hosting the guitar, the bass, the piano. The drum room is only for the drums. And I'm using the same plugin with the same preset. The only difference is that I'm changing the decay time a little bit to shorten up the guitar decay a little bit. Give it a sense of space, kind of mimicking a live room in a real studio, analog studio. We don't want big washy reverbs. Excuse me. On the vocals, on the lead vocal, we're going to a delay, then into a small room, into a plate, and into a hall. Okay, to kind of give little dashes of each and kind of build it up so it gives a little thickness to the vocal without sounding too washy, but a little sense of space. And then the background vocals, right now, I'm just sending them to a hall. So I'm not sending them to the delays, the small room, and the plates, although you can do that if you choose to. It's just the way I like to work. And then again, as I'm getting more dialed into the mix, I tweak these things a little bit. But as you can see, they're subtle. But when accumulatively, when you take them away, it does make a large difference. And again, it just gives another little enhancement to the mix where we're getting the mix to sound a little bit bigger, a little bit more full without sounding like it has a bunch of effects on it. Okay, so I hope you enjoyed this section of looking at the room reverbs and delays and how we process them on instrumentation as well as vocals. Come on back for the next section where we're going to start to finalize this mix and we're going to add some parallel compression so you can see how that can take it one more step further to building up this mix to get it to sound more lively and a little bit larger than life. So come on back for the next section.